Welcome to A Lawyer's Guide to the Galaxy, a podcast about geek culture by lawyers, with your hosts, Ben Siders and Kirk Damman.
Today's episode is brought to you by Uncle Enzo's Pizza. If it's not there in 30 minutes, the whole world will know.
And welcome back to A Lawyer's Guide to the Galaxy, the podcast that asks interesting questions and speculates wildly about what the answers might be, but has no idea what the answers might be.
Actually be.
With your host, Ben Siders, that's me, and the other guy is Kirk Damman.
That's Kirk, as in the captain of the Enterprise.
We are intellectual property lawyers and certified geeks practicing law in St. Louis, Missouri. You can find me, Ben, on Twitter at Benjamin Siders, and you can find Kirk at KirkDMN. You can follow this podcast on Twitter at LGGPod. Kirk, we're back.
We're back.
Just us this time.
I know, this is our first episode in a while without a guest, so hopefully you guys like the guest episodes, but we're back to our witty banter.
Yes, witty banter. We've got quite a few topics to talk about today. So our main topic is going to be video games, and we're going to talk about just some general issues in video games, some interesting cases.
I think there's a lot happening in video games right now. We're seeing sort of, some interesting law getting developed, much of which is definitely sort of entering the public consciousness. So we just wanted to talk briefly about it, go through some basic stuff, a few updates. We've obviously talked about video games before.
Some fun cases being filed, too, over things that are rarely litigated. So we'll be talking about that as well. Some other things that are going on out there in the wider world. We have public domain works. This is the first year since I was in undergraduate school in the 90s that we've had anything enter the public domain in the United States.
Yeah,
so that's exciting.
It's kind of a cool thing, and I think it's one of those worth mentioning. People refer to it as Happy Public Domain Day, which was January 1st, 2019.
Yeah. Well, we'll get into a little bit about why that is. We can talk about it right now. The short answer is, I think when your copyright expires, so if you file something, say, 75 years ago today, or whatever it was, the copyright expires, but you get the term for the rest of the calendar year. So if you publish, say July 1st of 2018, your copyright term actually runs until the end of calendar year 2018, which means everything from 1923 or whatever it was, or 1921. I can't remember, is all enters the public domain together on January 1. Yep. So if you've seen anything out there on the internet or wherever else about a whole bunch of works entering the public domain, that is why. They all, everything from the last year entered at the same time.
Yep, and that's, I think the interesting thing, you sort of bump into it and people comment about the reason why this is, it's worth commenting about, is this is kind of one of those kind of vagaries of law. And what happened here is when they passed the extensions and
the Sonny
Bono Act and granted some copyright extensions, you end up sort of granting these things in some sense retroactively because you grant them to copyrights through a certain window. Because of that, we had a 20-year window when basically nothing entered the public domain because everything that was within that 20-year window basically got extended.
Yeah, it would have, but for this extension.
For the extension. And so that meant that a huge number of works entered the public domain on January 1st, 2019, because sort of all of this window ran out. Now, from now on out, unless we have another extension act, we're going to have stuff enter every year.
At this point.
Yeah, I think that, I don't know if there'll even really be a proposal from us to a copyright extension. I mean, there's no argument that we need to comport with the rest of the world. I mean, pretty much the world now has a universal copyright. I think most people acknowledge being plenty long.
I think it'll be one-off things like the Music Modernization Act where something like sound recordings, which were belatedly added to the Copyright Act, they later decide, we now have a mess with the internet and with 50 jurisdictions of state law governing these things prior to 1972. So let's just move it all to the federal law, harmonize it all, and get some certainty in this industry so that we can stop having fights about it.
Yeah, and I think you may see some, sort of piecemeal extension. I don't think we're going to see a broad extension of copyright that covers all, copyrighted works.
And that's not really an extension even. That was more, it kind of is because not all the states protected things for as long, and the federal copyrights are longer. But the intention of doing that, I don't think, was to extend copyrights. It was just to harmonize. It was
really to harmonize across different kinds of copyrights. And it's again, I think the thing that's valuable to think about in conjunction with sort of the public domain day and the concept of it is that this is unique because we haven't had one for 20 years. And we haven't had one for 20 years, not because of the fact that like we didn't have works created, but because there was this just sort of bump.
Yeah, there was this window of works that would have gone in the 90s but didn't.
And what we're going to have now is effectively every January 1st, things are going to enter the public domain again. And that's kind of cool. If you happen to be an artist or anything along those lines, or you're interested in particular works, you're going to be able to figure out, hey, this work expires on January 1st. This work expires on January 1st this year.
Now, that said, we have to be careful with that. The original work has entered the public domain.
Yes.
But a lot of what, for books, what you go and buy off Amazon.com is not the original. It is usually has annotations and forewords and afterwords and some other things that the publisher adds so that they can establish a new copyright in their particular printing of the work. So Beowulf is a good example. That's been in the public. That was never copyrighted, right?
I'm not sure there was a copyright law when that was written. Yeah,
that doesn't mean you can go take the Penguin Books version of it, if they even publish it. I don't know, and then just go copy it wholesale. You cannot. You can only copy the original Beowulf text to the extent you can find it.
Well, a good example of things
or translation,
out there
like a translation
is,
into English would be copyrighted separately.
Yep. Is stuff like the works of H.P. Lovecraft, which for the most part are in the public domain, and there's hundreds of public domain copies out there, but there are also copyrighted versions out there of people who've done specific annotations, specific collections, stuff like that. So it doesn't necessarily mean that everything's out there.
Yeah, everything
but
you find is not necessarily public domain.
Find it,
It's a trick.
But it is a very, very interesting thing. It's a very sort of it's intriguing because as you mentioned, we weren't even in law school at the point in time that, the last time
Bill
things
Clinton
entered public
was
domain.
president.
Yeah. And we sort of look back. It's funny when you actually mentioned Bill Clinton was president. I happened to be, in the car. I was doing a lot of driving over the holidays and was listening through things on my iPod, and I totally forgot. But I had a number of Capitol Steps albums. I don't know if you've ever listened to Capitol Steps, but, they basically do a lot of parody songs and humor associated with, Washington, D.C. I have Capitol Steps albums from the early 2000s. And they're going through, parodying Bill Clinton and, George W. Bush and stuff like that. And it was fascinating to listen to them because it's how much has changed in conjunction with it and like what was important at that point in time and what we were talking about. And even sort of talking through the things of like what was a scandal at that point in time.
Yeah, that needle has moved substantially.
Yeah. But it ended up being really fascinating to sort of listen to them and be like, oh yeah, like I remember that. That was an interesting parody thing. And particularly again, if you ever know them, I don't know if they still do it, but definitely at that point in time, they had a guy who used to do a sort of textual revision, and basically what he would do is he'd reverse the letters of certain words, which would be to make it sound funny, and then your mind had to sort of reverse it out to understand what it meant. And he did one of these that's the history of the world, basically, or history of the United States up until that point in time, and it's one of those, like, just listening to it, it's wait a minute, like, none of this is important anymore.
Oh, yeah.
Like, all the stuff we have in recent history, we've completely forgotten. And by far the best one, because, again, he reverses the first letters of things, was the line, Woodrow Wilson won World War I. And he sort of, does a pause and, like, no, wait. Because obviously you can't do anything with that. But, yeah, it's a really sort of cool, sort of thing to see, but it's also really interesting to go back and like look at that. And again, looking at it, that was like a 2000, 2001, sort of
Which
presentation.
doesn't seem that long ago. I guess to us it doesn't.
Yeah.
Then I meet people who were born in, like my son in the late 90s who are now in college. I'm like, well, I guess it was a long time ago.
Yeah, it definitely is a long time ago and things like that. But it's weird because it doesn't feel that long. And like, we even commented about it. Bill Clinton doesn't feel that long ago. And part of it's just because, admittedly we've had, Barack Obama was a 2-term president. So, we obviously had some time in there. And Bill Clinton himself was a 2-term president.
So was W.
And then we just had George W. So we look at it and we're like, we've only really had 3 presidents since him. But at the same time, that's, still 16 years virtually. Yeah. And it's, over 20 from when he was first elected. And that's the thing where I think you get into it is it's like, oh yeah, that is actually kind of a long time.
Have you seen him lately? I mean, he's looking older.
Yeah.
Old Bill.
Well, there's that comment with the pictures of how much the presidency ages.
Oh yeah, even Obama, who's not that old. Like you see, like his inauguration picture, like a nice, healthy young man.
Yeah.
Now he's like that guy got old.
Got
his
gray hair.
Get old fast.
It's really kind of an impressive thing, but yeah, it's interesting again, I think, and turning back to the public domain thing, to think about the fact that, this has been 20 years. And I think even for any of our listeners, 20 years is going to be a relatively big period in anybody's life. You may very well have listeners out here who literally weren't alive the last time.
I was just going to say, probably.
Happened.
I mean, for those of you who are under, say, 30, you probably have no conscious memory of every year the announcement. Well, here's what's in the public domain now, and this rush of new movies and books and things comes out because everybody can do it.
Yeah,
it's not happened.
Yeah, and the idea that there's people who literally haven't had that, and it's one of those. I remember where they always did the concept of where they do this stuff for the Stanford undergrads. If you have to remember the freshmen entering Stanford this year, the following are like things that they've had. They've never known a world without the internet.
Yeah.
I still remember the one that was for 1 year where it was they don't know what a modem sounds like.
Oh man.
And you bump into those kind of weird scenarios of when you think about it, there is sort of huge differences about here. I was joking with it. We were watching some music stuff on TV with my kids, and we were commenting about the use of mass dancers. And, dancers sort of on stage. And it was joking because of the fact that my son was dancing. We commented he looked like a dancer for Madonna. And my daughter turns to us and goes, "Who's Madonna?"
Oh, no.
And I'm like, okay, we didn't have a quick music education. And we're showing her, Madonna videos. And it's one of those things where it's like, suddenly they're out of context. You look at them and you're like, this was radical. When this
Madonna
thing was done.
Madonna seems tame.
Yeah, and you look at it and you're like, this isn't this looks like something to be on primetime TV, and it really was kind of fascinating.
There's an offhand mention in the news the other day about Michael Jackson and his death, and my kids were like, "Who's that?" And I'm like, "All right." I finally educated them about the Beatles, which was an undertaking, and so now I got to do Michael Jackson, and they've to their credit, they like Michael Jackson. So I get in the car and they're like, "Dad, play some Michael Jackson songs," which I don't actually have any on my iPod, so I gotta go on a streaming service and hope they play the right thing or something.
See, I have the remastered Thriller. I actually got that when it came out as the CD, which is really cool.
Isn't it still the greatest selling album of all time? I think
it might be.
If not, it's one of.
Yeah,
I thought it was by a wide margin.
Yeah, and the remastered version is the one that has the third verse of the Vincent Price talking.
Yeah,
they didn't use. And all sorts of various things like that. That's actually really cool. And guys discussing making the video. There's a lot of commentary on it and stuff.
The
like
making
that.
of stuff for the video is cool, but
yeah.
I mean we're way off topic now.
Yeah, but that's normal.
Par for the course for this podcast. Speaking of off topic, TVs and movies. I got two, and you've got two.
Yeah, I got two. Yep.
All right, so I finally saw Ready Player One, which we talked about before.
Yeah, we both wanted to see.
Yeah, and I saw it because my kids wanted to see it, and the reviews I think were not great, not overwhelming for a Spielberg movie. Did he direct it? I don't think he directed it.
I don't know. I've heard a lot of actually negative reviews about it. A lot of people sort of liked it, but they didn't like the plot. They didn't like the story.
I'll tell you, I was entertained by it. It captured my interest. But there was a lot of just utter screen vomit. I mean, just CGI, excessive CGI, and it made sense in the course of the plot. Let me back up. For those of you who don't know what it is, it's a dystopian future where everybody's poor and lives in Cincinnati or Columbus or something. And this guy plugs into basically an Oculus-based internet. You put on a VR headset and a bodysuit, and then it tracks your motions in your crappy little trailer, and then it projects your avatar into this game, and you can interact with people and do things. So it's what we kind of see the future of the internet being. It's very very Black Sun. If you've read what's it called? I'm blanking on the title now.
Snow Crash.
Snow Crash. Yeah, Snow Crash. Very much like that. And the plot basically is that there's, the guy that invented this future internet was this odd recluse, and he left a bunch of Easter eggs, and whoever discovers all the Easter eggs will get the keys to control this online universe, which is where life, meaningful life takes place in the future because the real world stinks.
It's kind of the Matrix, except that the computers haven't taken over. We just do it voluntarily.
Yeah, it's just evil corporations. Right? So that's the basic plot, and you will not be at all shocked to discover that the protagonist finds all the eggs and wins the internet.
Yep.
So and there's a big dumb battle at the end that's chock full of pop culture references. So that's basically it. So the CGI makes sense in that context. I mean, it's in a video game world. It's kind of like the Matrix. There's a good excuse for an in-story explanation for the stylistic telling of the story.
Yeah.
That said, most of the action is not that interesting. It at least serves the plot in some sense, but I'm at a point in my life where I'm just bored with 45-minute action scenes where I know exactly what's going to happen. Just get to the end and show me what happens. That's the interesting part, is the denouement. So the 45 minutes of things blowing up, and there's an iron giant in there for some reason, and all kinds, the Jurassic Park, T-Rex, all that stuff, It's neat to see it for just a second. Be like, oh, we're in that world again.
Yeah.
But once you're past the gee whiz moment, it's just, honestly, it's fatiguing. It's boring to just sit there and watch it. And I know those of you who are in your 20s probably haven't hit that point yet, but you will. You'll get there. Or I'm like, you know what? I don't need this. I want that 45 minutes of my life back. Get to the end. Show me what happens. I'm more interested in these characters and their relationships and an explanation of what's going on than watching this silly battle play out. So that, and I don't know. That I felt the same way about the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. Like, okay, I get it. You've set it up. Now I don't need 45 minutes of people swinging around on ships in a storm. I understand. I get it.
Yeah, though I have to admit there were certain parts of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies that were just fun to watch because of what they were.
Oh yeah, like once they set it up, like all the establishing stuff to establish the universe and then play around with it, and then you wrap it up. But these movies, spend half an hour setting up a universe, and then it's just endless chasing. I mean, I find chase scenes so incredibly boring in movies now. With the lone exception, I guess, of the Mission Impossible movies, and Mad Max, the last Mad Max movie. The only two action movies I can think of recently where they made the action part of the story in a way that advanced the plot, and was kinetically interesting to watch. I wasn't just like, I know what's going to happen, just get there. Hurry up, crash the car, run away. Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Moving on.
Yeah, exactly. How are we going to get away and stuff like that? It's interesting when you talk about sort of the things. I'll do my first one here, and actually the first one I saw in conjunction was Transformers: The Last Night.
I have not seen that, and I might not. We should say Kirk is a big Transformers fan.
I'm an enormous Transformers fan. I actually collected the Transformers toys for a huge period of time. I've only just recently sold off my collection.
There's a lot in your office still.
There's a lot in my office. I've definitely kept parts of it and parts of it that I wanted to focus on, but a big chunk of it, was stuff that was just taking up space, and I'd lost interest in the particular collecting aspects of that. So I sold off part of it so I could focus on other parts of it. But I mean, when the first Transformers movie came out, the modern Transformers movie came out, I was at the opening night. I think I was there with you and your son, if I remember rightly.
Yeah, we went to the Omnimax, didn't we?
And so I really enjoyed the first one. I thought they did a great job with it. The movies have unfortunately gone downhill, and part of the thing is I think they've gotten too into CGI robot fights.
Yeah. The first one didn't have much of that. They couldn't afford to do it.
And when they did it, it kind of made sense at the end.
Yeah.
The one comment I make with the first night that I actually liked is that the robot fights are actually lethal. Some of the robots actually die, obviously, which is one of the big problems that I think you bump into with a lot of sort of, treasured franchises. They don't want to hurt anybody. But I think
Except for Infinity War.
Infinity War. But I think the big problem you got into with the last night is it's kind of a fun concept with effectively the idea that essentially Merlin discovered Transformers, and that's where the King Arthur legend came from.
That's just, no offense to the screenwriters, that just sounds so dumb.
It does sound kind of dumb, but it's also like you can have some fun with it.
Make it fun, right?
Yeah, you can have some fun with it of like, okay, nobody's going to believe this, which there is a big thing with the fact that nobody believes this and stuff. I think, and there's like a fun scene with one of the Transformers is like the, I can't remember the name of the tank from World War I, the original tank from World War I.
Rumble?
And he's so old that parts fall off of him when he transforms and stuff like that. But the real problem with the movie is they kind of do this, it's this huge overarching plot that's continuing the Transformers story that makes no sense. I mean, I'm not giving anything away. Well, I am giving the movie away, but you don't want to see it.
Spoilers.
The Cybertron basically gets into low Earth orbit, attaches itself to Earth, and is essentially sucking the life force out of Earth, at which point in time they defeat it. But it's still in low Earth orbit.
I would think the tidal forces of a giant planet being right next door.
Yeah. And the fact that it would probably throw us out of our orbit around the sun.
Yeah.
And they drug these huge anchors across the ground, big enough to destroy the pyramids in Egypt. Somehow this didn't cause massive dust clouds.
So hang on. So there's physical anchors that
yes, there are physical anchors holding Cybertron to Earth.
Oh my god.
And and it's one of these things I can't get past the ludicrousness of it. That's the problem.
Yeah. It's a CGI spectacle. Yeah. But okay, so just render that, put it on YouTube, and we'll watch the 2 minutes of that.
The only sort of redeeming thing about it, I think, is is one of the things where they've got a physicist who sort of works for NASA, and they're all this stuff about we have to reclaim the staff, and it's all about like Merlin's fighting. He's like, forget all this like mythical crap. Just nuke these cables right here so it'll break apart. And stuff like that. And it's like, okay, this is actually kind of cool because he's very much the realist, and nobody believes him, and he's constantly sort of being picked on for like what it is, and he's the only person that proposes anything that makes any sense.
That's the thing. You kind of need a character in a plot that absurd to be the one guy that's like, this is insanity. How come nobody else realizes that this is ridiculous?
And that's exactly what he is. He basically does that of like, this whole plot makes no sense. I'm going to propose things that make sense to try to fight this, and none of it's going to work, and nobody's going to believe me because they're all bought into this like supernatural type thing. So that was my one thing with it. I didn't even think it was particularly good CGI robot fighting. There's a couple points that the plot's kind of interesting. They do a couple of kind of neat plot points. The idea of like combining parts of the Merlin mythology into sort of the Transformers universe, they do a couple of them really well and kind of neat concepts of it. But the reality of it is most of it is essentially like just incoherent plot mechanism. And again, it feels like this is act 3 of a 6-act, giant story that we need to set up the fact that, these planets need to be interconnected and need to have a relationship, which we've been setting up for the last 3 episodes, 3 things anyway. Let's get away from this big macro plot idea.
Well, they kind of did that with the Bumblebee movie, which was better received. I haven't seen it.
I think Bumblebee is supposed to be set beforehand, and the only reason I'm saying that is because the CGI, they're like older school looking Transformers. Like Optimus Prime has this older look. And so I'm wondering if it's supposed to be, and like Bumblebee is a VW bug.
Yeah, it's actually,
And so I'm wondering if it's supposed to be set beforehand, like in the 70s
that
or 80s.
That by itself raises IP issues because I believe they wanted Bumblebee to be a VW bug for the first Transformers live-action film, and Volkswagen wouldn't do it.
Well, he jokingly sort of, they have the scene where the VW bug, and he like bumps the VW bug or something like that makes it fall apart. And then they turn him into a Camaro.
Yep.
Maybe
so Chevy just paid more for the...
whatever it might be. But
hey, it's a nice-looking car.
But I mean, they did it. I think Bumblebee as a Camaro worked, as to what they had as the concept. Particularly in the first movie, it was kind of a fun thing, and his talking with the radio and stuff like that. And there's some fun scenes actually in First Night where they have like the various Transformers becoming different cars because they can. And there's a great scene where actually one of them sort of like this woman's trying to escape from the Transformer, and you see this incredibly like high. I don't know what exactly it is. I think it might be a Lamborghini or something similar to that. Like pull up behind it, and she's like yelling at the person like hey, do this, and like the Transformer turns into that car because he thinks it's cool. And it's like, okay, that's actually kind of a neat sort of concept of what they have with it.
Well, I saw First Man, which is the sort of biopic about Neil Armstrong and the moon landing, which actually the movie starts in the early 60s and ends with the moon landing. Actually, it ends with him in decontamination after he gets back. It's not really about the moon landing, though. Like, I expected there to be like a training montage at some point with like a really dumb like 1960s rock soundtrack in the background, and it never does that. It's really more of a character study about Armstrong dealing with loss. I don't know if this is true or not, but as it opens up, he's got a daughter that's sick with cancer. She dies, and the rest of the movie is sort of him, throwing himself into his work and this mission, and doing all these very dangerous things. And as he goes through it, and those of you who followed the space program at all realize it's very dangerous. Lots of people lost their lives.
And he's a good friend that loses his life.
Yeah, he does. Yeah. And so there's a number of scenes like that where they talk about how many people he worked with that they lost in the 50s, and then how many more they lose during the Gemini and Apollo programs. And it's sombering. I mean, it's a heavy movie, and it's directed and written very slowly. There's a lot of just slow shots of Armstrong. As Ryan Gosling plays Neil Armstrong and does really well with it. Just sitting at his desk and just staring off, for 10 seconds. So it's not like an action, exciting movie, although they do, I think, fictionalize the eagle landing a little bit. I've watched the video of the actual eagle landing before, so I knew what was going to happen. And then at the very end of the eagle landing in the movie, like, they're almost out of fuel and they're going to fall into a crater like that. No, there was no crater to fall into.
Yeah, they did miss the landing zone, and there was a danger. I think the fuel was accurate. I think there was some concern they were going to run out of fuel.
Also
and not
interesting.
Be able to land.
They had a button. So in the movie, as he's landing, a bunch of different like random alarms go off in the eagle, and he's like, "I don't know what that is. Flight, tell me what this alarm means." I'm like, "I don't remember hearing that." So I re-listened to the landing, and you can hear those alarms go off, and he does ask them what it is, and they're like, "We'll check on it," but it doesn't matter. Like, they never get back to him before he lands the thing. So, so the moon landing is part of it. it does give you a sense of the gravity and severity of what they were doing. Haha, gravity. But it's not really like a space action adventure movie.
Yeah, it's not the right stuff.
Yeah, it's much slower. There are a couple scenes where they show him training in like the multi-axis spinner and some of that kind of stuff. The part I probably liked the best though is when the ships launch, they show you the viewpoint from inside the cockpit of the capsule.
Oh, that's kind of cool.
Which is just, it's this little tiny metal box on top of a giant missile.
Yeah.
and it's, it doesn't have shock absorbers. It's not a sedan.
Yeah.
So when the ship takes off, everything rattles and creaks, It's not like it was really aggressively field tested. And you just see the viewpoint from inside the ship and all the rattling and the noise and how much control they don't really have over it.
Yeah.
It is utterly terrifying, even though you obviously know he survives. So it's interesting to see, because I can't remember a movie made with that perspective of being in a ship during a launch. It's always from the outside, which is way more interesting because there's basically no windows.
Yeah, that's kind of cool, actually, with the idea of, what was it like to basically be on it. I think your statement is, you're truly strapped to the front of a missile.
It's very claustrophobic.
You barely understand.
Yeah. So I definitely enjoyed the movie, but like I said, if you're looking for something that's like really detailed into the science and the engineering of the space program, it's not really what it's about.
Okay. Cool. The other one I had with it that I actually just finished this morning, prior to doing this, is a movie I really wanted to see and I've wanted to see for a long time, which was Annihilation.
Yeah, I want to see that too.
And part of it is we both really enjoyed Rex Machina. Similar the same director. I also like Natalie Portman. It's one of those where I really like her as an actress. She's one of the few actresses that I would see a movie just because she's in it. Though I like her in serious roles. I think she does much better in sort of serious, somewhat gritty roles, to be quite truthful. That's a little bit what this is. I mean, she's, as they comment about early on in one of the scenes in it, all the characters are damaged goods.
Yeah.
And that's done very much on
What's the premise? I think a lot of people, this is a movie that really flew under the radar.
Yeah, it definitely flew under the radar. I've heard it loosely described as a science fiction horror movie. I would not say it's particularly horror. It definitely is suspense at times. The basic premise is you find out that Natalie Portman is a professor. She's a professor in medical school because she's talking to future doctors, but she's essentially a cell biologist. Obviously studies some form of cancer. And it starts off with her, giving the lecture, talking about, cell division, and that's what they're going to do in this class. You find out that her husband is a soldier. Her husband's been missing in action for a year. She sort of can't get over it. It's definitely causing her, huge amounts of sort of mental distress. That coming weekend, she's going to go home and repaint the bedroom, which you get as an idea that this is kind of this cathartic event of her trying to let go.
Starting over.
While she's painting it, her husband shows up, coming back from a mission. They sit down at the kitchen table. He can't remember anything. He's saying I don't remember. And he's very dazed and very sort of confused and out of it and stuff like that. I think an extremely good scene, and they actually do some stuff. They use the scene imagery later on, is he takes a sip of water and he says, I don't feel very well. And he sits the water down and you see blood spreading through the water. At which point in time, the next scene is cut scene to them in an ambulance racing to the hospital. They get pulled over by the ubiquitous black SUVs, hustle him out. She wakes up in some kind of government facility, which you find out is outside the Shimmer. And you've seen earlier, you saw a meteorite hit a lighthouse earlier. Yeah. That's just something you saw. And basically the Shimmer is this area where they know it's centered around a lighthouse. They don't know what's inside it. They've sent teams inside it.
But
none of them have come back.
Geological disruption of some
something
kind.
Disruption, stuff like that. But basically they've sent teams inside. None have come back. Her husband's the first person to come back. He's suffering massive organ failure. His body's basically falling apart. And they're trying to figure out what this thing is because they know it's expanding and they have to do something about it.
So it's sort of a mystery horror, like what's in there and what's causing it.
Yeah, what's inside, what's in it is what's causing it. They end up picking another team. She ends up volunteering the team. They do a really great job of one of the comments they make is, it's all women. And they never say it, but they hint at that's because we need to control for the fact that all the rest were men and they didn't come back. Maybe that's part of it.
I thought that was an interesting part of this particular movie so there's four main characters, right?
Yeah.
All four of the main leads are basically female scientists of some kind.
Yeah,
right?
well, so you have essentially the psychologist who picks all the teams and she decides she needs to go in herself. This woman who's basically, you get the impression is a very high-end cell biologist of some form. You have another woman who's a geologist, physicist type of person, and then you got a woman who's a paramedic, which also is very logical. The other thing is Natalie Portman's character is also an ex-soldier.
Yep.
And she's the only one with military training. She's been in the army. That's how she met her husband. You get the impression everybody else is military that's gone in. This is the first time they're really sending scientists.
And this came out at the same time as the Ghostbusters reboot.
Yeah.
Which I wonder if that's why it was overshadowed, because that was like the girl movie, right? Like the movie that has all the gender roles flipped from traditional Hollywood scripts. And that got all the press attention. And this one, I didn't hear anybody talking about.
Yeah, and it's one of those where the fact that they're all women is, like I said, it's hinted at in the beginning that like this is just controlling a variable. But it's, it doesn't really matter. The point of it is that they're people coming in here that are placed in an extremely unknown environment.
There are 4 characters who happen to be women, but it's not, Yeah,
and one of the great things, and again, this is early on, and if they first step inside the Shimmer, you sort of see them step inside the Shimmer. The next scene, it starts, and she has this weird dream. The thing, you don't know if it's a dream or a flashback or what exactly it is, where she's been with a man who's clearly not her husband. And you have this scene, she like wakes up inside a tent and she opens up the thing of the tent and she like comes out and she's clearly disoriented. And you see like the other people in the team and like one's like moving like packs of stuff out of their backpack and things like that. And she like walks over and she's like, sorry, disoriented. Like, what's going on? And he's like, yeah, we all are. And he's like, do any of you guys remember setting up camp? And they're like, according to our rations, we've been here 4 days. And it literally was the jump cut. Like, you don't remember any of it either because that was the jump cut from them entering the Shimmer to this morning.
So like that's good storytelling, right? Like, we're following these characters. We're experiencing what they experience. And, some of the tension from a movie comes from the audience knowing some things the characters don't because you're walking into trouble.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of a risk to tell a story that way, right? Where you're like, we're not going to give you any other information. You're going to discover this at the same time the characters do.
And what I think was really cool in the way they did it is the women all have very different reactions to sort of what's going on in this. There's a real question of like, as they said, there's 2 outcomes for what happened to the teams. Something killed them or they killed each other. And it's constantly this interplay of like, are we going to kill each other? Like, and you can see like they're meant to, but basically the basic answer they give away pretty quickly is something is happening in conjunction with the biology here, which is effectively making chimeras. So basically you've got like plants that are growing together, like single plants on the same vine that shouldn't be growing together. They encounter a few animals that are clearly like copies of animals. They do some really cool scenes. One of the first, the later animals they encounter, I don't want to give it too much of the later parts of the movie, but one of the animals they encounter, the chimeric idea of it being a hunter and what it gains in the course of being a hunter is an extremely disturbing concept that really works in the movie and makes it a truly terrifying enemy. Not least to the fact of just the way it attacks and what what else is going on at the point in time it attacks. But some really interesting stuff with that, some interesting stuff of sort of the relationship between them, what this thing is. The one unfortunate thought I think I had in the movie is they kind of do some cool stuff at the end in conjunction with explanation both of her husband and what's going on. It does definitely leave some interesting unanswered questions that they definitely go straight to at the end. At the same time, I found the end a little disappointing because I think they could have done much more with either leaving it open-ended or giving it a little bit more of an explanation. Either direction would have worked a little bit better. I felt like it kind of just ended.
Yeah.
And, it's something where there's no real grounds for a sequel. They could do one, but there's no real grounds for a sequel.
Yeah, I kind of like that. I'm tired of everything having to have a sequel tacked on.
Yeah, and if you've seen Ex Machina, it's got some of that similar thing of like, wait, there's something potentially loose in the world, but we don't really know if it's dangerous or anything, like, that kind of thing. And that's what I thought. I think he was going for that same feel, but it's just kind of a weird.
Would you recommend it?
I would recommend it. It's an extremely beautiful movie. The cinematography is amazing. I love movies that are sort of well shot.
Yeah.
Again, I do a lot of technical things. Whoever did the set design did a great job. There's so much stuff is just disturbing about the set design with this being sort of alien and foreign. And you get the impression, so there's a number of scenes where you get these kind of weird colored lichens like growing on things. Periodically, they just show up. And they just happen to be in weird places and things like that. And it just makes the whole thing disturbing, like what you're seeing, because it's all very natural except for these pieces that aren't.
See, that I like that. I like that approach to where it doesn't like there's not some evil space monster,
Yeah.
It's just this natural phenomenon that's happening and producing whatever the threat is, and you've got characters who have to use their skills, knowledge, intelligence to overcome the problem.
What it is.
Yeah.
And it also happens to make things dangerous. There's a great line she actually says right at the very end of it where it said it was destroying things. And she's like, no, it was changing things.
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, that's a great way to look at the movie is it's changing things.
It'd be fun to explore that thematically. So I'll
we got to probably move on to some real topics here.
Yeah, let's talk about video games.
Yeah, let's talk about video games.
So we did a couple episodes where we hit on some video game issues. I think episode 8 was when we talked about video game clones. And today we're going to talk about other issues with video games, and we'll just kind of go through those one by one. The one that's probably the most interesting right now is the dance choreography cases that are going on.
And I think we really need to talk about this. Is the Fortnite issues. I think most of us have heard about this on the news.
If you haven't, then 3 people, at least 3, have sued the makers of Fortnite.
Yeah, there was 3 currently that were all filed together.
Yep.
There's one prior case.
Let's back up. If you don't know what Fortnite is, somehow.
Why are you listening to this podcast?
It's basically an arena game where I've never played it. I'm not interested in playing it. No offense, Fortnite, but I can't keep up with your fast Twitch.
My nephew plays it. Yeah, I can't do fast Twitch games anymore either.
But it's an arena combat game, long story short. And you can buy emotes and whatnot for your character in the game, and one of the things you can buy is dance moves.
Yeah, a lot of the emotes basically are dance moves.
Yeah.
So there's no discussion. They just characters do certain dances. They have certain meanings. This is my understanding from it. Again, my nephew plays. I don't, but my understanding is that you don't really talk. You emote by doing these very short dance moves.
Yeah. And so they've incorporated some dance moves that purportedly belong to somebody else.
Yeah.
And they're now being sued over. One of them is the Carlton from the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. For a good chunk of our audience, you may have no idea what that is. It's what Will Smith did before he was Will Smith.
Yeah, Will Smith sort of. I think it was kind of thing that made Will Smith famous in some respects.
Probably, yeah. It was his first big TV break after. And
it was a popular show. When
it really was. Yeah, I watched it. It was a good show. Anyway, his cousin, I think it is Carlton. What's his last name?
We should have written this down from the show.
I know. So anyway, the actor that plays Carlton, who's sort of a stuffy Poindexter type on the show, wears a lot of sweaters. Carlton there's a scene where Carlton is doing this dance. He puts a record on and starts dancing around, and Will Smith sees him, and it's pretty funny. Just Google the Carlton.
And it's kind of a crazy dance. It's a very energetic, kind of crazy dance.
I tried to do it once to show my kids what it was, and I realized I can't do that. So yeah, it's a crazy dance. So one of them is the Carlton you can get in Fortnite.
Yep.
Another one is the floss, which I guess is that dance the kids do now where they just swing their arms back and forth.
It's supposed to look basically like you're flossing your butt. I mean, that's the sort of easiest way to describe it.
Yeah, I'd seen it done, and I'm like, what is that? And that was one of my get off my lawn moments I had as a 40-year-old man.
My kids are doing it. Yeah, it's my daughter, you can see, she's in gymnastics and stuff like that, so she'd take it, and she encountered it a lot at school. So I was very familiar with the floss.
And there's another one by a rapper that I can't remember what the 2 Milli, I think it is.
2 Milli,
yeah. So anyway, so these 3 people have all sued Fortnite, saying that their dance choreography was stolen. And the question is, well, was it? And there's really a couple of different questions here. One is, do they own?
I think we want to put in conjunction with this is there's a lot of people talking about this on the internet and a lot of stuff out there. And from our point of view in looking at this is actually an extremely complicated legal issue. And the fact that there's a lot of interacting things here, and I think a lot of people who are discussing this in the internet are simplifying it. They're focusing on one of the points and sort of saying, oh, this one obviously solves it. And a lot of what we wanted to do, the reason we wanted to talk about this is there's a lot of different things here potentially at play. And how they interact is important.
The threshold question is whether these dance moves could be copyrighted at all.
At all. Yep.
And dance choreography is eligible for copyright under certain circumstances.
Correct.
But the scope of that protection is relatively narrow compared to other forms of copyright.
And these are short dance moves. And there's a lot of indication that very short things are not subject to copyright.
And there's not much litigation on this. I mean, you can imagine dance choreography I think was added to the 1976 Act. Probably wasn't protected before that. I don't know for sure, but I'm just guessing.
Now, written choreography would be. So the actual drawing or writing out a choreographic book, something like that. But the actual physical dance move that somebody's performing, I think the other thing, and again, a lot of people stop here. Like they look at this and say that's all there is in conjunction with this issue. And, it's short, so therefore it's not copyrighted. And I think the question you bump into is that really true? Is this short? What is it? What you really bump into with it is and I think we were just talking about this beforehand. We're kind of jumping back, I think, to the 80s, and like Michael Jackson, particularly Michael Jackson, but a lot of performers sort of from that era. This was an era when sort of new true dance moves were created, not necessarily dances. So you go back to like, hey, you got like swing dances and stuff like that, where sort of whole dances were
dances
created.
used to be sort of a formalized style with defined steps that were part of the dance, and skilled dancing was about how precisely you perform the steps and what's your body posture and shoulders and footwork and that kind of thing. And more contemporary modern dances don't have those elements where it's that strict. If you ever watched the shows like So You Think You Can Dance and stuff like that, the more modern styles are less defined. It's more about an emotion or a feel. Or like the pop and lock dancers. That's crazy. You've ever seen those guys.
Well, and I think the thing is if you talk about sort of swing dancing, I mean, I studied swing dancing when I was in school. I took swing dancing classes. We took some swing dancing classes after we graduated.
Just like Kirk and his wife are about the only people who dance at our firm events.
And we actually
can dance.
We actually can aggressively sort of swing dance. We don't do full swing. We do what we know as Lindy Hop. But it's one of those things where there's defined moves in that, but at the same time you can make up moves in conjunction with it, how you put them together. But if you talk about it as a choreography, I think most people would look at it and say, well, us doing the dance to an entire song is choreography. What about one individual move? These moves is what it is. But again, when I think you get into a lot of modern dancing, and again, the reason I specifically say the 80s, I talk about Michael Jackson, things like the moonwalk and the Thriller and stuff like that are very short dances.
They're individual moves.
Yeah, they're individual moves that were sort of combined together and were done underneath it. And in some sense, I sort of put it in breakdancing.
Yeah.
And these very aggressive, very athletic moves, but they were not dance moves done in a particular pattern or a particular dance. They were just truly dance moves to do to music whenever you wanted to. And I think when we were growing up, that was kind of what dancing was. Like when you went to a school dance, everybody got in a circle and like somebody did just moves in the center. And sort of the more crazy you were, the better. That you kind of have this change of dancing. And I think that's one of the issues we have with this is what we're seeing here is this change of dancing. That dancing now arguably is a lot of very short moves. We don't have the idea that, we have these big choreographies. We're not square dancing anymore. Or we're not, doing foxtrot anymore.
You have those for like competitive dancing.
Yes.
Like if you watch these So You Think You Can Dance shows, they will choreograph an entire song. And I think that's more what dance choreography as a copyright matter is meant to protect. But you can imagine, because the rights you get if you own a copyright to dance choreography include the right to public performance. So if the floss is copyrightable, then no one can swing their arms back and forth in front of themselves in public, or you violated the copyright.
Yeah, under public performance. And again, I think a lot of people sort of end the analysis here. They sort of look at it and say, there's no way these things can be copyrighted. Well, what we've commented about and sort of, looking at it is that there's a lot more at stake here. One of which is not just is the dance copyrighted and sort of how does this apply? And again, I think if we look at it and say the dance is copyrighted, whether or not they stole it is a foregone conclusion. So basically that's there becomes a very interesting question of is the dance copyrightable? How much of the dance is copyrightable?
Is sort of the key question in the case.
And if you compare something like the floss, which is very simple, to the Carlton, which is quite a bit more aggressive, more involved, is there a difference there? Where do these things fall? The second issue, one that I think is being very much overlooked, is where did they get the image for their avatar dancing from in the first place? And there's been some assertion that they actually physically copied the video. They actually image lifted the video.
Particularly for the Carlton.
For the Carlton in particular.
The floss, the kid, I think just put a video on the internet.
On YouTube, yeah.
But the Carlton was part of a television production by NBC, I think?
Might have been. I can't remember,
I can't remember what channel that was on. So the question is, did they not only infringe the dance, if there even is copyright in the dance, did they infringe the video by borrowing elements of the recorded performance of the dance and replicating it in the game?
And I think that's one of the really interesting questions is you may have a secondary sort of copyright infringement here, which is the copyright in the video. The problem with it is at this point in time, we arguably have the wrong plaintiff. Because the actor,
producers own it?
The actor probably does not own the copyright in the video. That's probably owned by the television studio or by the producers. And so, it's a very interesting question of sort of, is there something else at play here? What else have we got? Unfortunately, I think that, the likelihood of us getting answers to any of these questions in court is probably relatively small. We have to talk about there was a fourth suit that was settled. There's probably a decent chance that these will settle and we'll never get the answers to these questions. But I think the real point of us talking about it here is it's not simple. This is not something that's simple as to look at it and say, these are short moves and therefore not subject to copyright, even though dance choreography is copyrightable. There's both a lot of questions about short versus long. What is copyrightable in dance choreography, an area that's really not been litigated? Again, how long is long enough?
Well, there's also some guidance from the Copyright Office saying that certain types of dances, like heritage dances, are not protectable at all, like square dancing and things like that.
Yep.
And I don't know I guess I can speculate as to what the public policy reasons for that are. But I mean, dance choreography is one of those areas where I think any copyright protection by necessity has to be pretty thin.
Yeah.
Because you can't just allow people to establish 100-year monopolies over certain ways of moving your body.
Yeah.
Like you got to be able to get around.
But again, I think there's really potential to get at heritage dancing, and you look at the fact and say, hey, well, heritage dancing is something we're supposed to do socially. It's not supposed to be covered because it's exactly this. Well, these are not that. These are all modern. These are all things that have come out essentially in the last 20 years. Yeah. Does that have a change, and does that affect things?
But I think of like World of Warcraft, which famously has every character you can play does some kind of different dance.
Yeah.
And I think, and then even some of the characters you can't play, like there's ogres in there, and every once in a while they'll get up and do the Chris Farley Chippendales dance from Saturday Night Live, Now, I mean, Chris is gone, so maybe that's why nothing was enforced there. But I mean, they also have
although presumably his estate still has the rights.
Yeah, I guess they would. Or NBC would for Saturday Night Live.
Exactly.
But like, Michael Jackson's, the Night Elves in that game did Michael Jackson's moves. They did the moonwalk and some other things. They all had various dances.
Yeah.
And to my knowledge, nobody ever raised any issues with them. So, with this going forward, does that change? If people start taking a closer look at that, and does Blizzard need to maybe go back and rethink or get licenses?
Yeah. And I think that's the other thing that makes this so interesting is we're in the age of the meme now. Where things are much shorter, stuff like that. If we look at it and say, well, short dances are not copyrightable, are tweets copyrightable? Those are short,
very short.
I mean, you kind of bump into things like that. Well, what about the individual image that we turn into, the random meme, the Game of Thrones image we turn into the random meme? Those kind of things is what it is. We've had a societal shift, and I think that the dance choreography questions raised in a lot of stuff by Fortnite echoes that. Mm-hmm. And it happens to echo it in an area of copyright dance choreography, which has very little law. It's been sort of established, very little judicial determination around it. So we've got these kind of very interesting questions. And again, from us as IP lawyers, I think this is something where we look at this case and go, this is actually extremely interesting.
Yeah.
And we'd love to see some of this go to court. Again, I'm not sure it will. I think these potentially have to be settled. But it's something where it's a very interesting questions that impact a lot more than just the dance choreography for emojis in Fortnite, that impact what is copyrightable when it comes to things that are short.
And what was interesting about this case, one of the things that's interesting, which you kind of alluded to earlier, is the infringement argument is almost non-existent, or the non-infringement argument. They clearly borrowed it. One of them's called the floss.
Yeah.
So the whole thing turns on whether it's eligible in the first place. We're going to have a lawsuit about copyright infringement. I mean, they'll have fair use defenses and all the other, the kitchen.
Even all the fair use defense hinges on what's copyrighted.
Yeah. But as a threshold matter, you've got to get over this question, and then also, do the plaintiffs want an answer to that question at all, or do they just want to get a settlement, get some money, and not have someone come out and say no? The floss is not copyrightable, and now we all can do it all we want.
Well, and if I remember rightly, the rapper who's involved in it, I believe, has actually said he'll license them to use the thing. So, I mean, we've also got the potential of the licensing sort of thing. But he's even specifically said he wants it credited as his dance. It's not credited as him currently.
And particularly
and he wants it
for a rap artist where the performance is a big part of the value of the art form. That makes a lot of sense for him to say, look, you want to use my dance, fine, but I should be credited as the person who came up with this. This is part of my signature act.
Yeah, and so there's just a lot of, I think, very interesting things about it. Yeah. And again, the reason we really wanted to talk about the Fortnite case is because I think that a lot of people talking about it online, you see a lot of stuff online, are really trying to simplify the issue and saying either this is or isn't, clear infringement. It's clear infringement, it is copyrightable, or it's just not copyrightable and therefore clearly not infringement. We really wanted to sort of point out in this episode that I don't think it's nearly that clear. There's a lot more issues involved in here, and there's a lot more ramifications for things outside of this, depending on what these issues mean, that we might see in the future. We might very well see questions as to, again, are tweets copyrightable? Do we bump into the fact that they're too short?
Mm-hmm. Or about the animated GIFs. Like I sent a tweet to somebody the other day just making like a point about something statistically. It was a sports thing. And the guy responded with an animated GIF of Pam from The Office saying, yep, and that's it. Yeah. And it was like a half-second GIF. Now, I don't know if the makers of Twitter have a license from NBC to use the Pam Beasley GIF. Yeah. But I don't know if they even need one. Yeah. For something that short, is that a fair use?
Again, fair use. You get into fair use questions. You get into the things with it. These short infringements. I said this is the age of the meme.
Well, I think this is also why people struggle so much with what you can and can't do with copyright, because this kind of conduct goes on constantly online. And it has. I mean, you and I have been online since at least the early 90s, dinosaurs. But I mean, this kind of thing, not exactly like this, but like ISKA BBS. We were both on there in the 90s. They used to have a forum called Lyrics where you would because back then it was hard to find the lyrics for a song.
Yeah, unless they published them in the album
and
cover.
it was the age of Nirvana where you couldn't understand what anybody said anyway. So,
as Weird Al Yankovic, directly pointed out in his song.
Yes. So, ISKA had a lyrics forum where you put a request in and say, can someone post the lyrics to Smells Like Teen Spirit? Because I can't tell what they are. And someone would post them.
Usually because they had the album, and so they could get them out of the album
notes. You
cover.
could figure it out. Back when we had albums and liner notes. Oh my! But yeah, and I remember at some point ISKA got rid of the forum because they were worried about it being copyright infringement. The lyrics of a song are copyrightable, like any other form of poetry or prose would be.
And you see today, I mean, how many you get on YouTube and look up any song, and there are plenty of songs that play it with the lyrics shown in front of it as opposed to a video. And part of that's presumably to avoid sync license. But those are potentially interesting copyright infringements that again we haven't necessarily really gotten into
They're everyday
yet.
things that people encounter, and so they just assume that since they can find it, it must not be illegal.
Yeah.
But they don't know who doesn't have a license and hasn't been caught yet, or who doesn't have a license and the person who owns the IP just doesn't care because it's not worth going after them, or maybe they do have a license.
Well, one of the ones I bumped into, when I was talking about wanting to show my kids Madonna videos. It was very much making sure I found the actual video, on YouTube. And it was one of those where, fortunately, I think, particularly with music videos, the artists, the record labels are very, very good about labeling and pointing out which one is the truly official one, which one almost always has an ad in front of it. But it's one of those where, quite frankly, I really appreciate that because it's very helpful to me when I'm going through and going, where is the real video to this? Okay, this is the one that's clearly posted by the artist. Yep. This is the real one. So let me watch that one to make sure that I have the right one because we talked about it the not real Star Wars trailers and things like that people have done.
That makes me so mad.
You bump into it and you hate sort of being duped, but when you're trying to use
especially when it looks like a good movie.
Yeah,
this is way better than what we actually got.
And when you're trying to use it as an educational thing, it's this is what it was, this is why this thing's valuable. You got to make sure you have the right one, and it's not edited, and it's what is actually real.
Let's talk about another case. This came down earlier this year, and it's not under U.S. law, but it's still interesting. Nintendo won a lawsuit against a Tokyo-based go-kart rental service that basically made a real-life version of Mario Kart. You can even rent costumes and dress like whoever you wanted to, and then you go race go-karts. And the court, a Japanese court, ordered the go-kart company to stop renting the costumes. The go-karts, I think, were okay. But stop renting the costumes and pay Nintendo 10 million yen, which is like $90,000.
That's not a lot of money.
We don't have, I didn't dig into this any further than that, but this kind of gets to the characters for hire case we talked about earlier, which we also have an update on. We'll talk about that later. But the costumes were sort of the thing that put them over the edge. They're dressing up like Nintendo's characters. And I couldn't tell from the story whether it was a copyright issue, a trademark issue, or maybe something else arising under Japanese law. But I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, and again, I think the interesting thing about this is this concept of sort of, taking one thing and turning it into another. There's not a video game here. This is go-kart rental. There's no question that Mario Kart is based upon go-kart racing. It's called kart, and they're obviously riding go-karts and pretty obvious go-karts. Now, admittedly, they're pretty stylized. Many of them would probably not really work in real life.
Yeah.
But, it's...
When your go-karts don't launch turtle shells at people?
Or you throw them, or they have giant, like Venus flytraps on the front that bite your enemies and then send them to jail. Which
Maybe yours don't.
Hey, I want one if you have one. But yeah, I think the thing that's really, again, sort of interesting in conjunction with this is we have it moving into the real world sort of thing, the idea of characters. And we have the question here of what was the infringement? It sounds like it was the characters, not necessarily the concept.
Nintendo has issued a statement. They said that they would, quote, continue to take necessary measures against infringement of intellectual property, including our brand, end quote. That makes it sound trademarkish.
Yeah. But it's also important to note that's a translation. So obviously
it is.
We don't speak Japanese.
Yeah, Nintendo just said of IP, including our brand, so they could also be asserting they should have a copyright in the way they look. I would think they would.
Yeah.
But with costumes are that weird issue where You get into the utilitarian thing, which, that's a U.S. concept, but I would not be surprised if the Japanese IP office had similar concepts.
And that's what maybe worth talking about. I know you got an update to our U.S.
Yeah, let's go
copyright.
back to that. I kind of skipped over that.
Yeah, costume case.
Yeah, so characters for hire, if we had talked about this in a prior episode about, was it the cosplay episode maybe?
I think it was the cosplay episode.
But there's these companies that hire actors to wear apparently poor costumes of Disney characters. And you can hire them to come to your kids' birthday parties and dress up as Elsa or Belle or whoever. Disney sued this company seeking an injunction, and they're raising mostly trademark claims, I think. I think there's probably, I would be shocked if there were not also copyright claims, but I think they're mostly raising trademark claims that there's a likelihood of confusion between Disney's licensed characters from its theme parks, because they do the same thing. They hire actors.
If you've been to a Disney theme park, there are plenty of actors, extremely good actors.
Yeah. And Disney argued that this is going to confuse consumers, and even if it doesn't, it's going to tarnish Disney's brand because the quality of the costumes and performances is bad. The judge partially granted summary judgment in favor of the defendant and against Disney. We should say what summary judgment means. It basically means there's no need for a trial.
Yeah, the parties effectively the plaintiff can't win.
Yeah, the parties don't disagree. So we only have trials to decide facts. So if there's no actual dispute between the parties about what the facts are, there's no need for a trial. The judge can just rule based on what the law says, because the jury doesn't decide the law. They decide the facts. So,
and that's kind of a weird legal concept of law versus facts. But just to give sort of the real brief thing behind it and the way I sort of said it early on, basically if the facts are clear, there can be only one interpretation of the law. That's sort of the way the law looks at it. So therefore, if the judge can say, since there can be only one interpretation, this is the only acceptable interpretation, and there's no need to dispute anything because nothing else can be true. And in summary judgment, the real key to it is effectively it's an assertion. So again, summary judgment in favor of the defendant is regardless of any dispute that may still exist, even if we find them entirely in the benefit of the plaintiff still can't win.
Yeah. Like with summary judgment, somebody has to move for it. And so you submit a suggestion of what you think all the agreed upon facts are, the undisputed material facts to the case. Then the defendant will always say, no, you're wrong, and try and find some dispute of fact to say this fact is not undisputed, and a jury has to decide it, so we need to get to a jury. At which point cases usually settle because civil juries are unpredictable.
And they go both ways where you can assert this is the unpredicted fact, this is the unpredicted facts. And so the example would be like, if we have a simple safe of like I sold you a car, if we look at it and say the contract undisputedly says that I did sell you the car, this is what you paid for it, you paid me, and that's undisputed fact, but I didn't give you the car, how can I win this case of saying I don't owe you the car?
Yeah, the judge can just decide that.
The judge can
there's no need for a jury to find any facts or consider any evidence. So in this case, the defendant presumably moved for summary judgment, and the judge granted it in part. There were other claims that were not granted. Interestingly, the judge basically said that there's no chance for confusion because the audience for the services are adults, not children.
And I think this is a fascinating sort of determination, quite frankly, in the way of doing it, which basically says the people who are buying these services are the adults. Now, presumably the kids are confused. They actually think these are truly the Disney characters.
That's what Disney said. The market is children. And the plaintiff said no, or the defendant said no. The consumers may be children. Adults are making the decision to purchase it or not, and it's their minds we care about. They're the market for this. Are they confused into thinking they're getting Disney characters when they're not? And then the court said no, there's no way.
And I think that, quite frankly, that's given that interpretation, that's correct. I don't think any of these, parents assume they're hiring actual Disney actors.
No, I think they probably knew darn well that
exactly.
they weren't. And then on the poor quality of the imitations, that actually worked against Disney. The judge said that none of the reviews in the record of the services had any signs of confusion, and to the extent that the defendants in this case had poor quality imitations, the judge basically said if it's that bad, that only further demonstrates that it's not Disney.
Exactly. Basically, if you make a bad costume, you're probably not confused that it's really the real thing.
Yeah.
Which I find fascinating. My thing I still also want to keep bumping into this is Disney sells costumes.
Yeah, they do.
Officially licensed costumes. My daughter owns a large number of them. That are designed to make you into the character. What am I supposed to do with those? Aren't I supposed to play the character? And again, you sort of bump into that idea of if they're selling these for adults, and they do sell them for adults.
They do.
why can't I play that character, and why can't I be paid to potentially play that character? And I got to wonder if somewhat that's a little bit of where the judge.
I think that's what it is.
From.
It's a commercial use of something like you can buy, if you go to like a fabric store, you can get officially licensed Star Wars fabric to make quilts and blankets out of. And there's a line along the edge called the salvage line, which that's where they print the copyrights and that kind of stuff. And it often says on there, not for commercial use or resale or something like that. So the idea is they're going to sell you this fabric, and implicit with that is that you can make a blanket for your own use or to give to your sister or your nephew, but you can't open an Etsy store and sell it there. But I don't find that persuasive. What if I happen to get a yard of fabric that doesn't have the salvage line on it? Are you saying that's a binding contract? So I don't find that persuasive at all.
And it's cut off whenever you make anything. You're not going to incorporate it into what you're making.
So, and I don't think they've had much luck shutting that kind of thing down, but it's a related type of issue where once I buy the thing, unless there's some shrink wrap license to go with it that's going to say you can't use this costume for anything other than your own private individual use.
Which I'm sure they say, quite frankly.
They may or may not, but if I don't know that until after I've bought it and opened it, and maybe I can or can't return it, that's a whole another problem. Moreover, if I'm going to a Halloween party, I'm going to display it in public.
Yeah.
Or to go trick-or-treating, I have to go out in public.
And again, if I have that costume and I go to a costume party, if I now pretend to be the character that this is, I get a character for, we happen to be into the Potterverse right now, into a Dementor, and I just, go around and, make hand gestures and don't say anything.
Just act like the character. You're just repeating the idea. What if I guess if you repeat lines from the movie, maybe, then your, public performance or...
Well, that's why I particularly chose a Dementor, because they don't say anything.
They don't say any lines, yeah. So they're interesting issues there. Another one, we talked about cultural IP not too long ago with the Cree. It's a Canadian First Nations or First People. I forget the phrase they use for it, but a Native Canadian society. And they had taken some issue with how they were depicted in the video game Civilization 6. And in particular, they were frustrated that they weren't consulted really on how their cultural values could be reflected in a game like that. And the comments from the headman, I think his name was Milton Tutusis.
Oh, I can't remember that. I remember we talked about it in another episode.
It just jumped in my head. But he basically said, they should have showed up and talked to us, and he said they're honored and thrilled to be depicted in a video game, but not like that. And
they said wrong,
it's
effectively.
a game about Western concepts of history, which necessarily involved conquest and acquisition of land, which are values that did not resonate with the Cree people, and so he would have liked to have seen them portrayed differently, which there is an antecedent for. Civilization 5 had civilizations that did not acquire land by conquest. They couldn't build settlers and go out and colonize new lands. They expanded and grew through trade and diplomacy. So, and you and I kind of talked about how, well, that sounds more interesting, actually. Something different than the usual conquest thing. Like, and I think one of the ideas we had...
We hinted at the idea of could you actually gain by leaving land in its undisturbed state?
I can't remember if we said that in the podcast or not, but I know on the way back we talked about what we were kind of like brainstorming for mechanics you could do, and one of them would be, like, one of the values is to live more in harmony with the natural world as it is, rather than using technology to terraform everything, for lack of a better term. What if you just made it so that if you're playing the Cree, then you actually gain bonuses over time the longer the land is left in its natural state and goes undisturbed?
Yeah.
Well, they may have listened to us, Kirk.
I doubt they listened to us.
No, they may have listened to Milton, though, because a new expansion's coming out for Civilization 6 that features another non-Western culture, which, yay, I'm happy to see more interesting cultures depicted. It is I don't know how to say it, the Maori?
Maori, I assume,
I think the New Zealand native people. I think they're part of the Polynesian cultures.
It's definitely their behavior is very Polynesian-like, whether or not that's...
the wayfaring society.
The wayfaring society.
Yeah. Anyway, they're in this new expansion, and there's some interesting mechanics. One of them is that they start at sea. They start the game at sea, already knowing how to build ships and sail, which normally takes you a long time to develop that technology in Civilization. I often don't build it till the Middle Ages because I don't need it. I never go into the ocean. But they start with that. They start at sea, so the first thing you do with them is go discover land and build your first settlement on a newly discovered island or coast or something like that. So that's neat. I like that. The other thing, though, is one of their bonuses as a civilization is that they gain production bonuses if you don't improve the rainforest tiles. I like that. It makes a lot of sense. It sort of reflects what we talked about with the communal IP, where, there's traditional remedies and traditional medicine and things like that. That's a topic we tried to get into but didn't have time in the prior episode. But this sort of reflects, like, you don't chop down the rainforest and then turn it into farmland. You leave it the way that it is, and it actually becomes more useful for you.
Yeah, and particularly becomes more useful over time. We don't I think exactly how these guys are going to play, but that's definitely what they proposed.
Also interesting, and this is more just of a flavor thing. So the Maori gain extra food from fishing ocean resources. And the way it works in Civ is you basically send a fisher out and he builds a boat on the fish, and the fish stay there, and you just get extra food from it. But you don't actually deplete the fish. It's just there forever. However, there's a feature called harvesting where you can remove the resource from the game board entirely, and then you get a one-time massive infusion of resources. So if you just need to grow a city quickly, you can harvest the fish tile. Then you can't work it anymore because it's gone, but your city will grow really fast.
Yeah, you literally overfish to destroy a capital resource, which is an intriguing concept.
The Maori can't do that.
Yeah.
They can't. They cannot harvest ocean resources, which is interesting. I'd never harvest resources in that game anyway, for the most part. So this is actually almost a penalty, sort of, but not really, because I don't think most players harvest resources that often, at least not in the ocean tiles. But this sort of also reflects a cultural norm, the reverence for the ocean and ocean life and that sort of thing. So I like all these concepts. I really I can't wait for the game to come out. I want to play it. I want to play these guys particularly. And I'm interesting to see that they're doing some creative things with the mechanics that provide both strategic challenges and hopefully also better honor the actual values of these.
We obviously don't know. I mean, if this is what the
I don't know if the Maori think about
based
this.
on what they think about it, or if they were even asked.
I'd be curious if they actually went out and talked to some cultural leaders in the Maori community and asked them, like, what makes sense to you? Like what would be non-offensive and be consistent with your history and your values.
But I think from us looking at it as a gameplay point of view, it's really cool to have sort of this completely different concept.
Definitely.
From it, which is a really neat idea.
Well, we're running really long. I think we probably ought to wrap this one up. We've got a couple more things to talk about, First Amendment issues, and then Wes Ehrlichman, who is the president of our local St. Louis Game Dev Co-op chapter here, wanted us to talk about strategy guides and some things like that. But we're running long. I think we'll wrap this one up.
Maybe we'll get into the strategy guides one next time. I think that in and of itself is a really intriguing concept, the sort of really secondary market that's created by a lot of sort of IP things, strategy guides, price guides, things like that. Is something we can potentially get into on its own.
Yeah, we also have, there's a whole lot of video game patents. I didn't even prepare those for today's episode that we wanted to talk about. So maybe we'll do a two-parter and we'll wrap up on video games next time.
Yep.
All right. Well, there's the music, and it is time to go. If you have questions, comments, topic ideas, criticisms, complaints, remarks, adulations, or rants, you can send your thoughts to us on Twitter at LGGpod or email us at lggpodcast@gmail.com. You can also talk to us on our Facebook page, search for Lawyer's Guide to the Galaxy, and find us there. Subscribe to this podcast on one or more of the platforms, or all of the platforms, to inflate our listenership numbers. We are on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, and the other places where you get your podcast content. If you like what you hear, please give us a review. Reviews are how we attract more listeners and make it easier for people to find us. You can find me on Twitter at Benjamin Siders, and Kirk is at KirkDMN. As we said, I think next time we're going to do part 2 of what was supposed to be a one-parter, but
we figured this was going to run long. We did do a lot of intro and movies and stuff like that in the beginning too, but we thought this one was potentially going to run long. We had contemplated the idea of doing this as a 2-part episode. I think it does make sense to do this as a 2-part episode.
When we sat down, Kirk looked at the sheet and he says, "Oh my!" I'm like, "Yeah, there's 3 hours of material here."
Yeah, and so I think that's the thing with it, and definitely we've got some good breaks of things we can move to. So I think we got through what we really hope to get through today.
For sure. All right, that's all for today. We'll see you next time. Lorem, play us out.
The views expressed by the participants of this program are their own and do not represent the views of, nor are they endorsed by Lewis Rice LLC, its officers, directors, employees, agents, representatives, shareholders, and subsidiaries. None of the content should be considered legal advice. As always, consult a lawyer. This podcast was produced and recorded at Cool Fire Studios in St. Louis, Missouri.